I'm Alan Greeley, and I love thinking and meditating on Scripture. Another word for it, which we don't use very often, is pondering. When the mother of Jesus heard the shepherds retell the vision of the angels' celebratory singing, the Scripture says Mary treasured up all these things, pondering them in her heart. That alone is my goal with this podcast. I want us to treasure in our hearts what we hear from God and ponder it. It would be an honor to have you listen in and ponder with me. To God be the glory.
You have been so, so good to me.
Ponder with me about the frustration of not knowing answers or having the answers but still not understanding why. Why does it have to be like this? I'm sure you've all looked at society at some point and thought, what is happening? What in the world is going on? This is madness. How could people be thinking that? How did we get into this situation as a society? What is going on here? We all know those questions aren't new, and they aren't new to the Bible either. Some of the greatest Bible characters asked these questions about the society they were living in. In fact, there is a whole book of the Bible dedicated to these questions. What is going on here? God, what are you going to do about this? And then when he's given the answers in the book, the main character can't hardly believe the answers that he's gotten, and he's got to wrestle with what God just told him. The book I'm referring to is Habakkuk. Habakkuk is almost entirely dedicated to understanding what in the world is happening with society and what God plans to do about it. Ponder it with me. Imagine Habakkuk in his home. He's on his recliner, and he's watching CNN or Fox News, and Habakkuk is watching all of the madness in his day, and he just can't believe it. But being the man of God that he is, he does what we should do. He takes it to God. Specifically, what he says to God is, I want your help here. We need your help here. It's less about the answers right now at this point in the beginning of the book, and it's more about, God, please intervene, do something somehow, some way to stop all the sin and society from spinning out of control. Listen to what he says at the very beginning of the book. Oh Lord, how long shall I cry for help and you will not hear? Or cry to you violence, and you will not save? Why do you make me see iniquity? Why do you look idly at wrong? Destruction and violence are before me. Strife and contention arise. The law is paralyzed. Justice never goes forth. For the wicked surround the righteous, and justice goes forth perverted. So Habakkuk is on his recliner. He's watching CNN or Fox, and he's just disgusted by what he sees. He takes it to God. I see violence always. It's like Habakkuk is watching the same news channels we are. School shootings, assassination attempts, unchecked gang crime. Doesn't it seem like Habakkuk is watching the same things we are? Habakkuk goes on to say it's like justice is nowhere to be found. It's perverted. The law is paralyzed. That is God's law. It's like Habakkuk is looking at society and saying Scripture is seemingly discarded. Scripture is ignored. It's like Scripture has no place in our society anymore. That's the way Habakkuk sees his world that he's living in. And his question to God is, why aren't you intervening? I love the honesty in prayer. Whenever I study prayer with people, I almost always bring this up. I am consistently blown away by the honesty that oozes out of the prayers of the Bible. And it's not coming from a disrespectful place, though. I think we need to specify that. It's actually coming from the opposite. It's a respect that we know that God knows what's going on, and it's a respect for the holiness of God, that he's got to be bothered by all the spiritual filth even more than we are. And it's a respect that he can do something about it. So if God knows what's going on, if he's bothered by all the spiritual filth and he can do something about it, the reasonable thing to ask would be, why aren't you? The question Habakkuk is asking is not just honest, it's fair. If God knows about it, if he's bothered by it, and he can do something about it, it would be fair and reasonable to ask God, why aren't you doing something? And of course, the answer that comes back is the answer God would always give. I am doing something, Habakkuk. But if I told you what I were doing, you wouldn't believe even if I told you. God says in the next verse 5 of chapter 1, I am doing a work in your day which you would not believe even if you were told. God says, this would knock your socks off. You would not believe it. It would blow your mind if I told you. And he goes on to tell Habakkuk exactly what he plans on doing. We'll talk about that in just a moment. But I want us all to appreciate that God is always working behind the scenes. In our limited vision, there is so much that we can't see, and there's so much that we can't appreciate, but God is always working behind the scenes. His providence is always active, moving nations in and out, moving rulers in and out, bringing people into our lives, bringing them out of our lives. God is in constant motion. And all of it is designed to mold us and shape us. He's molding churches. He's shaping nations. So the answer to Habakkuk is our answer. If we ever get frustrated with God and we wonder if he's listening, is he watching, is he doing something about the evil in society, the answer is always an emphatic yes. I am working, God says. I do see, I do care. Yes, I'm working. Though I'm convinced the second thing he told Habakkuk would also be true of us. You wouldn't believe if I told you. It would blow our minds if we truly knew what God was doing behind the scenes and why he was doing it. If God were to tell you his exact plans for Russia and Ukraine, for an example, let's just pluck one of the greatest conundrums of our world out and just look at it for a moment. If God were to tell you his exact plans for Russia and Ukraine, we'd have trouble computing. We'd say, wait, what? How? Why? Wait, God, say that again. And this is what it means to trust the Lord implicitly. This is the deepest level of trust. When you don't understand the details, but you understand God, you trust God because you know his character. The deepest chasm that trust will ever cross is when you can't figure out why the details are what they are, but you trust the Lord anyway because you know his character. Do we know God so well to trust his weirdest, strangest plans? So God goes on to tell Habakkuk what his plans are. And the plans of God were to raise up the Babylonians. They're called the Chaldeans in the book, same nation, just different name. God plans to raise up the Babylonians and punish the nation of Judah, which is where Jerusalem was. And Habakkuk's answer in response to that is exactly what God predicted. Habakkuk says, wait just a minute, you're doing what? Remember in chapter 1, verse 5, God told Habakkuk, you won't understand if I told you. And then he told him what was going to happen. And at the end of chapter 1, Habakkuk basically spends the rest of the chapter saying, I don't get it. I don't understand. And what Habakkuk didn't understand was this. How could you raise up the Babylonians to punish us when they are worse than we are? Will you actually let a nation like Babylon judge us in Judah when they are worse than we? They are more ungodly than we? They are more wicked than we. Will you really use a nation like that to punish evil? Tough questions, aren't they? Will God actually use evil for his long-term purposes? Let me ask it like that. Will God use evil in a moment for his long-term glory? And the answer that Scripture gives over and over again is yes. God can and will use evil rulers to manipulate events for his glory and honor. God can and will use evil rulers, evil nations, to manipulate events to his ultimate glory. You don't have to get very far into the Bible to see that. God did it with Pharaoh. He raised up Pharaoh that God might demonstrate his power. That is stated in Exodus 9, but Paul quotes that Exodus passage to the Roman church. In Romans 9:17, Paul says this, for the scripture says to Pharaoh, for this very purpose I raised you up, that I might show my power in you, and that my name might be proclaimed in all the earth. God used an evil Pharaoh, an evil nation, to advance his purposes. So God is going to use Babylon in the context of Habakkuk to advance his purposes. And for Habakkuk, it's like the very first time he's had to wrestle with all this, and we all will at some point. At some point, we've got to come to grips that evil may advance for a moment, but it will turn into the glorification of God in the end. But don't let that bother you, because the grandest event in human history was nasty evil, a horrendous tragedy, an unspeakable horror, a sinless man being executed, Jesus the Christ. But God took that evil, that horrendous tragedy, that unspeakable horror, and used it as amazing grace that's available to all. Christians, rejoice.
There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me.
Thank you so much for listening. I hope you found something to treasure in your hearts and ponder. The song you've heard is Reckless Love, sung by Praise and Harmony on their album, Resurrecting God. May God's face shine on you always.
Love of God, oh,